Welcome to Sexuality After. And my interview today is with Mike Iamele.
You
Good.
got
I
it.
got that right.
Mm-hmm.
So if you just want to talk about a little bit about who you are right now and what you do in life, and then we'll talk about kind of your childhood to start with.
Sure, that is a big question. Who am I? So, fortunately, given the work that I do, I have an answer to that question because I think I used to start that with, this is a label or this is a relationship. It was always who am I in context to something else. And I am aligned, zany, free, unmistakable, successful, and vulnerable. And I know that might not make much sense to you right now. Hopefully, it will by the end of this interview. But, I think that I am a person who I didn't really know who I was for a long time. I was really defined by what the world told me to be. So early on, I was, very successful. I owned a public relations agency, and that was my brand. And then there was a period in my life where millions of people were talking about my sex life, and that was my brand. And that was kind of who I was. And there was never this subjectivity of like, hey, this is me. This is who I am in the world today. And so, I do work, if you want to know a title, I do work that helps people to identify that for themselves, whether they're using it for sexuality or for business or for relationship issues. If they're comedians, I mean, you name it. People use it for a whole bunch of things. But I hope that answers your question. I'm aligned, zany,
Yes.
free, unmistakable, successful, and vulnerable.
That's amazing. I love it. What a great answer. Cool. So, when you were being raised through your childhood, what were some of the main messages you got around sexuality or sex?
Sex in my household was definitely not something that we explicitly talked about. It wasn't something that was kind of loud and proud and let's all be, excited about this. It was something that wasn't necessarily shamed, but it was really kind of hidden under the rug and something that we follow these kind of strict societal rules. And so my parents, my mom has only ever, maybe this is an overshare, sorry, mom, slept with two people in her life. I don't know how many my dad has slept with, but probably not very many. And my older sister has only slept with one person. And so there was this kind of like, you get into a monogamous relationship, you are, have the beautiful white picket fence. This was kind of a story of how it worked in that family. Now, my little sister decided to go a little bit of a different way with it, and she kind of exposed us to what sexual liberation could look like. And so there was a little bit of conversation, but there was a little bit of shame around it. It was kind of like, what will other people think? What will society think about this? And so I think my little sister and I were probably more bohemian in our kind of views and a liberation around sexuality, but it was definitely not something that we grew up talking about or feeling like we could be empowered asking questions and having conversations about things that we may be curious about.
Yeah, absolutely. So there was um it sounds like it wasn't directly not okay, but it also wasn't super approved of.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, that's uncomfortable. Let's not talk about it.
Right,
So
right.
there was nothing wrong. It wasn't like, even after in my story, when I ended up with Garrett, I can't wait to tell you what my dad said because it was not bad. Like everybody was very supportive, but it was just kind of, I think that in general, my parents or the people around me in life weren't necessarily comfortable with their own sexuality or talking about
Totally.
their own sexuality.
Totally.
And so they didn't know how to hold space for these nuanced sexual
Yes.
conversations.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm.
As parents, we just reflect whatever we feel inside.
Yeah.
Whoever we are inside, that's the atmosphere of the house.
Absolutely. And my dad grew up, he's an Italian immigrant. He grew up in a very, very Catholic household. And it was controversial that he married my mom, who is Jewish. And actually, they got pregnant out of wedlock. And so not only did he marry a Jew, but he,
Scandalous.
got a Jew pregnant, like without being married. And at the time, my Italian grandparents, they had never known anyone who wasn't white, Italian, and Catholic in their life. Like they grew up in this very small village in Italy. They came over to the US, did not speak English, and only had this Italian community. And so this was very scandalous. Like my dad is a lefty, but he's what they call a Catholic righty because he had to learn how to use his right hand because that was even scandalous to be a lefty. So to, grow up in that environment, I think he had a lot of um, shame or not really ability to explore things. And so, I think one thing that is so beautiful about growing up is you realize that your, parents are fallible and that they're not perfect
Totally.
and
Yeah.
that they don't have they have their own trauma that they're working through. And I think that's been really helpful on my own journey in unpacking my own sexuality and the lessons I learned about sexuality from my parents, because realizing where they came from and what they grew up with and how they move the needle. I mean, for me to
Totally.
marry anyone of any religion, of any race, of any culture was radical because for my parents, that was a huge fight they had to pull that I didn't have to deal with. And so that opened up the ability for me to be with Garrett in a way that I wasn't always appreciative of.
Yeah. How long did it take you to realize that about your parents? Like, oh, they're
Uh,
human beings.
sure. I mean, I think it's an ongoing journey. I think I'm still realizing it day by day. One blessing actually is both of my parents have been clients. They have been involved in my work in some
Nice.
capacity.
Yeah.
I think initially my mom just was like, "What do you do all day? I don't get it." And so she signed up for something. And I can tell you right now, she has been a client now for over 6 years. So my mom has been involved in my work at many different levels. She's
Nice.
benefited greatly. My dad has not been quite as involved, but he has been through a few different programs that I've done. And it's been really interesting because I've gotten to know them in a client way, in addition to, the more personal. And I'm like, really, really crazy about boundaries. So they would always call me Michael in real life. They only call me Mike in those settings. My mom says it all the time. She's like, it's like you're a different person. You just show up so differently. So, well, yeah, it's my job. Like that's how I have to. So I think that's been helpful. And, maybe over the last 5 years, really realizing, hey, these are human beings. They've got their own shit going on, and I can forgive them for anything I may have been angry about in the
Yeah.
past.
I would say it took me until my 30s,
Yeah.
especially when I had a kid. It was
Hmm.
like all of a sudden the light bulbs just went on.
Yep.
That's when it really happened
Yep.
for me. So it can take us a while.
Yep.
Cool. So tell me the story about Garrett. I can't wait to hear it.
Yeah. So, I was pretty successful early in life. So, when I was 22 years old, I actually worked with a few partners of a big PR firm, and they wanted to break off and start their own company. And so at 22, I was still in college. I was working full time. I graduated early, and I was now the owner of this very successful PR firm. And it was a little bit of a whirlwind life. I was partying a lot. I was going out. I have no idea how I had the energy. So I would like work all day, be out till like 2 or 3 a.m., and then go to work at 9. The math does not compute now in my 30s, but somehow back then it worked.
Yeah.
And so it was really a fast paced, high intensity, high stress lifestyle. And I one day woke up a few years later in my mid 20s and I was vomiting blood. And this was really scary, as you can imagine. I didn't know what was wrong with me. It just kind of happened overnight. And it's happened for about 2 months. And so I was vomiting blood pretty much daily for 2 months.
Jesus.
I was losing weight. I couldn't eat that much. I was in the emergency room getting fluids. And as this went on, there was a period where I was able to go to work still. And one day I went to work and I realized I had to go to the bathroom and I ran to the bathroom and I didn't make it. And I shit my pants at work. And it was devastating. I mean, it was
Of
the most
course.
mortifying moment of my life.
Yes.
And when I got home from that, I realized like I am going to die. Like something is happening to me. I need to figure this out. And so I started, every day going to reflexology, Reiki, acupuncture, like you name it, I was at something. And at the time, I also had two roommates, one of which was my older sister's friend, and she had a boyfriend. So she spent about half the week at our place. And the other was Garrett, who was a guy I knew from college. And he was a medical professional on residency. And so he kind of knew the system, and he was also just home. And so he started driving me to appointments because I couldn't drive myself anymore. And he started, cooking for me when I couldn't get off the couch, when I was crying, and maybe, even rubbing my back once in a while. And there was this moment I remember where I thought, I think I have feelings for him. And at the time, it felt really confusing because up until that point, I had only ever dated women or slept with women, or to my conscious knowledge, honestly, been interested in women. So, like I mentioned before, I've always thought of myself as a little bit bohemian. I lived when I started this company, I lived in San Francisco at the time. I had many gay friends. It wasn't something that I thought, like, oh my God, what if I'm gay? This is terrible. It was kind
Totally.
of like, if I'm ever interested, cool. Like, I will, sleep with whoever, but it's not something that's kind of on my radar. And so it felt very confusing. And I think adding to that confusion was, I'm scared I'm going to die. Is this just like there's a human within proximity and I am having feelings for this person? Like,
Yeah.
I didn't really know what was going on. And so I'm trying to unpack and solve this situation. And at the time, I was doing anything I could to get better. So I wrote handwritten letters to every member of my family saying things I never said to them out loud. And I mean, I was doing some really crazy stuff. And so that was where my mentality was at. And to be in that mentality, I thought, I can't hold anything in. I've just got to tell Garrett. Because in a normal point in my life, I would have thought, these aren't even sexual feelings. These are like not maybe romantic. I don't know. Like, why would I even mention it? Let me just brush it under the rug. But here I was thinking, I'm going to die. And so I decided I just have to tell him. And so I one day mustered up the courage and I started a conversation. And I said, Garrett, I don't even know what to say here. I don't know if you're going to want to punch me in the face. Like, I don't know where this is going, but I feel something and it doesn't feel sexual. It doesn't feel romantic, but it definitely feels different. And I want to talk about that. And he, I am so blessed that Garrett is the most thoughtful person in the world. There isn't a thing you can go to Garrett with that he won't say, okay, let me sit with that. So that's just how Garrett is
Yeah.
in life. And I think that made it a little bit easier or safer to say this to him. And so he kind of sat with us and we had a series of conversations and some like long emails where we processed our thoughts. And we talked for about 2 months. And after those 2 months, we began exploring over the course of 2 years if we could have a physical relationship or if intimacy would even feel good for us or if we could have a relationship without intimacy. And so we were really open to all options.
Mhm.
There was a good amount of time where we were still dating and sleeping with women while also exploring relationships. So we were not exclusive. There was one, I'm not saying this interview publicly, but there was a weird night where there was this like kind of weird threesome. It got very strange. But anyway, we were exploring it. And one of these times, I've actually never said this on an interview before. One time I remember he was hooking up with a particular woman after we had all gone out and I knew who she was. And I got jealous.
Mm.
And I thought, okay, wait a minute, something is changing here, right? Like, I don't want him to be physical with anybody else. And so we need to explore this in new ways. And we used, pornography to explore because at the time, there were a lot of things I didn't feel comfortable engaging in, but I could explore and say, hey, could I be interested in that? Can I find that sexy or be turned on without having the, push or the lack of safety to physicalize something? And so that was part of the exploration. I remember people love to ask me, they say, Mike, the first time you kissed Garrett, I bet it was magical because when you kiss someone you love, it is just so magical. No, it was the most uncomfortable thing I'd ever felt because I had never felt facial hair before when kissing
Totally.
somebody.
Yeah.
And so this was a very uncomfortable moment for me. And so we didn't kiss for a long time because it wasn't something that, I felt comfortable with. And so finally, to cut short, years of my life, after 2 years, we had realized that this was something serious. And we moved in just the two of us. And I was, I'm probably, if you can't tell, a pretty vulnerable person. We already know that's one of my sensitivities. I would have loved to have told more people in my life. Garrett's very private. And so I wanted to respect his timeline, but we decided after these 2 years, like this was the deadline. We are going to tell friends and family because this is real. This is a serious thing. It's not, I'm now better. I wasn't sick anymore. So it wasn't just because of that. And so at the time, I also knew I needed to leave my job because if I'm throwing up blood probably not the best case scenario for me. And so I gave a year's notice. Now, to anybody listening, I never recommend you do that. However, I was an owner of this company and I thought this is the right thing to do, right? So I gave a year's notice. And during that year, I thought, I'm just going to figure something out. And so I went to nutrition school and herbal school. I was studying all these like psychic classes, while I was full-time working, while I was healing myself, and while I was navigating my first same-sex relationship. It was by far the worst year of my life. But I got through it. And that ended in December, which just coincided with when we were going to tell our family about us being together. So it was just kind of like all happening at once for me.
Yep.
And I remember, I'll never forget what my dad said. So I was really nervous to tell my parents. And, it was an interesting place to tell my parents because I think a lot of times when people, quote unquote, come out, they're coming out about their sexuality or who they are. But what I was saying is I'm dating Garrett. Like I wasn't necessarily, even defining my sexuality because to be honest with you, I was still exploring and I wasn't sure what that was.
Yep.
And labels didn't feel useful to me at the time. And so I said this, and my dad's response was, okay, so you're leaving your job and you found yourself a rich boyfriend. You are so smart. And I said, okay, thank you, Dad. And so, he said, like, that's great. And so my parents were, of course, pretty supportive. I'd say most people were supportive. Some people took a while to get there. I won't name names today, but everybody got there eventually. And, I think for most people, it was more confusion of how to see us because, I think that some of my friends who, are gay, when they came out, they really felt called to embrace parts of themselves they couldn't embrace before. And for us, not a lot changed because it didn't feel like we were embracing. It felt like it felt a little bit different because we were embracing something that had been suppressed. We were exploring something new. Yep. And so I think a lot of people just didn't know how to react to us. And so at this time, I was an herbalist to Boston's, tech entrepreneurs because I was sick. I figured I can help these people not be sick. And I didn't love it. I'll be honest with you. I wasn't making a lot of money. It wasn't that fun. And I thought, well, crap. Okay, I left my job. I did this big thing. What am I going to do now? And so I said, well, you know what? I have some stories, right? I want to start finding my voice and sharing on a blog, not yet about my relationship because, I'm only told a few people in my life, so I'm not there yet, but about being really successful at a young age and getting sick, realizing it's not what it's cracked up to be, redefining success, all this stuff. And so I started writing a blog. And 3 months later, I got an email from a publisher who said, hey, Mike, I love your voice. Can we just give you a book deal?
Amazing.
Like, what? Does that happen? Like, I've been in business for 3 months now. I don't know what's going on here. So yeah, sure. You want to give me an advance? I will write a book for you. So I wrote this book. And in the book, they really wanted me to talk about my relationship and about my journey there and how that became part of defining success for myself and, exploring all of my parts of myself. And I thought, okay, great. I wrote about the relationship. I turned in that manuscript. And then I thought, oh, shit. Like, I haven't even told all these people in my life. They can't find out on the shelves of Barnes & Noble. Like, I need to tell people about this relationship.
Yep.
So I said, all right, well, I've got this little following now. I'm just going to write a blog post about this. And that's a great way to not have all these one-on-one conversations. I can just put it out there on Facebook. People can ask me questions if they want. It just felt better. And by the way, anybody coming out that feels safe to do this, and obviously safety first, I highly recommend just doing that because it was so much easier. Like, everyone got to have the behind the back conversations about me that I didn't have to be involved in. Totally. And then they could come to me and, talk about things. So I wrote this little blog post, not thinking much about it. And at the time, I was writing for a publication that asked me if I could just add a few details. And I thought about it and I said, you know what? It's basically the same thing. It's already out there. So I'll just add a few extra details that they asked me for and I'll send it in. So I sent them an email, went to bed that night, woke up the next morning, and 100,000 people had shared it. I can't tell you what it's like to wake up to millions of people talking about your sex life, especially when they're asking you to defend a sexuality that you're not even clear about. Yeah. So this was by far the most overwhelming moment of my life. I woke up to literally thousands of emails. I have never had that many emails before. I couldn't possibly read them all. Some of which were very, supportive, and people from all over the world talking about similar situations or exploring their own bisexuality, pansexuality, sexual fluidity. Um, Obviously, a good chunk were hate mail, and really, one thing I was surprised by is hate mail from all sides, from every sexual orientation. So there were people from all over, sending me really critical things
Yeah.
and asking me to defend something that to be honest with you, I just completely shut down. I was like, I am not checking my email. I am not, and it was really, really hard for me. I mean, my therapist got a call that week. Believe me, I had to work
Yeah.
through a lot of stuff. I had a lot of anxiety. Um, and here's the kicker. I still wasn't making any money in my business. So, like, I didn't really have a business model. Here I am with a book deal with millions of people talking my sex life. And that wasn't an avenue I wanted to go into for business. And I thought, I am such a failure. And I felt so embarrassed about, what was going on in my life. And, people were stalking Garrett. I mean, we had a lot of problems going on. And I'm like pretty tech phobic, to be honest with you. So at the time, Instagram, I don't know when Instagram came out, but this was back in 2014. So I think it was not quite as ubiquitous as it is today. I didn't really know what Instagram was. But I had been part of a Goose Island, the brewery. They had a scavenger hunt in Boston, and as a part of their scavenger hunt, and as a part of it, you had to download Instagram and show a sad selfie anytime. It was called a wild goose chase. Anytime you didn't get on the right path, and that's how you got extra points. Now, I am serious about my scavenger hunts, so I was definitely getting these extra points. And so my Instagram at the time was 20 pictures of myself looking really sad because that's all that I,
Right.
knew. So there are these people, thousands, tens of thousands of people like, what's wrong with you? Where are the sexy
Right.
photos of you and your boyfriend? Like, and that wasn't, so it was a very surreal time for me. But anyway, I didn't necessarily wasn't making money, and I just thought, okay, Mike, you are such a mess. You have this year to explore yourself. Let me go be obsessed with life purpose, and let me go try to figure out, what is my purpose? Because none of these things make sense, right? I've got branding and public relations. I've got this sickness, same-sex relationship, viral article, book deal, herbalism. Like, what the hell does any of this have to do with one another? And so when I say this, I'm not kidding you. I have read every book on life purpose out there that you can imagine. I have done every webinar. I cannot tell you how many times I have heard, you will know your purpose by the end of these 60 minutes. Almost never happens, but I've heard
Yeah.
that many times in my life.
Yeah.
And, when you do enough of this stuff, you hear the same things. And so a lot of them say, figure out your passions, figure out your skills, then figure out what the world needs and find that middle point. I thought, okay, I can do this. How do these things relate? This same-sex relationship, sexuality, book deal, herbalism, healing. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got it. I'm meant to create a blogging course. And this course is going to be, it's going to help people get book deals, sure, but it's going to be deep and spiritual. It's going to be about searching yourself, finding your voice, exploring the parts of you, the stories that haven't been told. This makes so much sense. And now I had no money. I was totally broke at this point, but I just thought, like, screw it. Like, I know my purpose. I am putting everything into this. These books tell me I got to go pro. I'm going pro. So I got the fancy microphone and that lighting kit and the editing software. I had a business partner. I had a web designer, like thousands of dollars later. This was putting me into debt, but this was the thing. And I put it out into the world. I just knew this was going to take off. I put it out into the world, and I think 5 people bought it. It was a colossal failure. And I just thought, I am done. I am so done because the world, it just doesn't want what I have to offer. Like, the world is objectifying me and sexualizing me and telling me that it only wants me to be the small part of myself. And I just wanted to resist. I was so sick of talking about my relationship that I actually stopped giving interviews about it because I was like, I'm way more interesting than just Garrett's boyfriend. Like, this is so annoying that the world doesn't want to see me. And so at this moment, now this is years later, but at this moment, it was so fresh that I just thought the world will never see me and I'm done. And so I decided to quit and to go back to public relations and to beg my partners to take me back at my own company. So I didn't know if I had a job at my own company, beg them. And I was going to host a failure celebration. And the thinking around that was really like, I feel like such a failure, but at least I did things that got me to failure. At least I
Mhm.
did something in life. Like I went for love. I left my job. I got a book deal. I got this viral article. Like I took risks in life. That's got to be worth something. I can't let this year blow by and feel like it's not worth anything. And so I took the one thing I was still confident at, which wasn't much, but it was branding and public relations. And I said, okay, let me just go into a Facebook group I'm a part of and say, hey, I'm not successful. Maybe you can be. Let me just celebrate my failure by offering as many branding sessions as I can give you. And so I did 9 hours of branding sessions that day, just gave whatever I could away for free. And I'm used to working, at least in public relations, with a lot of like tech billionaires and healthcare politicians and people like this. These people were a lot more, psychics and artists and therapists and writers and people like that. And so I did these. I just mapped their brand like I would always do with anybody. And every single one of these people, there were 6 of them that day, all of them said to me some variation of, Mike, you didn't just tell me my brand, you explained my entire life purpose. I understand who I am. So I'm sitting there like, what are you like? Something is wrong with you. I don't know what you're talking about, but okay. And, I left this and I thought, well, what do I have to lose at this point? So I started doing this process myself and I spent about 2 hours doing it. And at the end of those 2 hours, I came up with 6 words. And those words are aligned, zany, free, unmistakable, successful, and vulnerable. And there was this light bulb moment because it was just kind of like where I started thinking, oh my God, with Garrett, I have never felt that safe to be vulnerable. I have never felt like I literally can't make a mistake or I can be weird and zany. And with this book deal, I can see that over here. But with PR, I can see I could be most things, but not this. And it just started making sense that in the relationships or the places I could feel all these things, they felt good and successful and fulfilling. And the places where I didn't, they didn't. And so I thought, okay, have my little epiphany over here. And I saw my email. Thankfully, this was a few months after the article, so I was not getting thousands of emails, but I saw this email from someone I had worked with that day. And she said, hey, Mike, I was raving about this session. One of my friends wants to buy it. What do you call this thing? Do you sell it? I thought, I don't know. It's not a thing. It's my branding work. But you're telling me that it's purposeful. I guess I'll call it sacred branding. Slap that name on, just made it up. And this person hired me. I think she was using me for a business context at the time. She liked it. The day after that, I had 2 other clients. 3 weeks later, I had 30 clients. And that was 7 years ago. So I never went back to public relations. And what I've come to find and why it relates to, sexuality and all of this is that we have these things we're most sensitive to. All of us do, right? Some of us, when we were babies, we're sensitive to a tight swaddle and we really crave freedom. And our entire lives, we're going to feel trapped easily. All of our trauma is going to be around that. Our sexual desire is going to be around that. Like when we feel free to express, we're going to be more turned on, not just sexually, but to life in general. And we can start to map that these same sensitivities over and over again can predict for us what feels purposeful and successful and where we can feel like ourselves, where we can really begin to shine. And that work has really helped me and a number of people I've worked with over the years explore sexuality, explore gender, explore parts of themselves without the labels, who they are at their core of sensitivity without who they've been told to be or imposed upon.
Yeah, amazing. There's so many things I want to say about all of that. But I'll just go with the last thing. I love how you mentioned that you discovering the core of who you are relates to your sexuality and everything else. I think that's really important. That, and you mentioned earlier that you felt like people kind of wanted to hear about your sexuality and nothing else.
Yeah.
But our sexuality is an aspect of who we are that correlates with every other part of who we are.
Yes. Yes.
And when you are sexually free or connected to yourself, you're the most sexy when you're the most authentic,
Yes.
right? When you know yourself the most. And
Yes.
I just love how you kind of brought that in. And
There was a moment that really shifted things for me. So I'm, if you can't tell, psychotically intentional. And so when I was proposing to to Garrett, my now husband, I did a lot of self work. And one day I was at a park And I was really sitting and meditating and thinking, why does Garrett love me? I really want to think about this before I propose to him. And I was listening to my headphones, the song Young and Beautiful by Lana Del Rey came on. And I thought, is it my proverbial youth and beauty? And these things will fade. What if I lose that? Is it I make X amount of money, or I'm interesting, or I'm fun? And what if I don't feel like being interesting one day? Am I less lovable? Like really sitting with what is lovable about me, or really what is my worth? And so I'm sitting there and I'm having this kind of deep, intense thoughts with myself. And I looked over and there was a rose bush in full bloom. And I thought, that rose bush is so beautiful. I love having roses in my house. And I thought, well, what happens if it loses any of its roses, right? What happens if it loses this rose of intelligence or humor or money or beauty or youth or whatever? Another one grows back. Not the same one, but another one grows back. Because its worth, its value, any aspect of itself, it's not held in the individual flowers. Those are manifestations of that worth, but it's held way down the roots, which is its essence. It's not, I'm not worthy because I'm intelligent. That's a manifestation of who I am. I'm not sexual in this way because, I'm not worthy because of my sexuality. It's a manifestation of who I am. And if I ever lose any of those things, some new aspect will grow of me. There will be a new way of expressing myself. And this got really interesting because I started realizing I can't be objectified. The world might try to objectify me, but I can't be. Because even if you're only seeing one small sliver of who I am, it encodes the whole essence. You are seeing a part of me. The way I talk about sexuality, the way I express my sexuality, it is all of my essence. You're feeling all of that. It's unique and it's my brand. It's my sensitivities. There is no way to separate that from other aspects of my life. Now, maybe that's all you can see where you're at, and that's okay. I don't have to judge where you're at or what you see in me, but nobody can reduce me anymore because I am all of myself. And it does start with that core. It starts with, like we talked about, sexuality.
That's beautiful. It's amazing. I love how you explain that. Thank you. On your website, you say along the same line, you say something about like figure out what makes you magnetic in your business or your bed.
Yeah.
I love that you bring sexuality, like it's not just about sexuality. It's like whatever impacts your sexuality also impacts your business. It also impacts everything else in your life. Like it's all one big package. And the package is you.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So what does make you magnetic in business and bed?
Well, for me, as we know, aligned, zany, free, unmistakable, successful, and vulnerable. I know that me being vulnerable has always been a factor in any successful moment in my life. Like really sharing my truth and vulnerability, that's something I'm sensitive to. I mean, if you want to make me fall in love with you, just be super vulnerable to me and I will love you. And I'm weird and zany and energetic and tell all these stories, and that makes me magnetic. And for so much of my life, I have been told I'm too much, right? We all have, right? Too intense, too emotional, too sensitive, too passionate, too whatever out there in the world. And those things, what someone's really saying, I've come to understand, is they're saying is, you're too much for me to handle in this container. They're telling you it's the wrong container. It's kind of like if I had a big pot of water and I tried to pour that big pot of water into a tiny little cup and it spilled all over the floor, I wouldn't shame the water for being too much. I would get a bigger pot. That just makes sense. And so when someone says that to me, I think, oh, wow, okay, doesn't fit for you. There's nothing on you, nothing on me. It's just not a fit here. That's okay. Yeah. Let me go find the places where there is a fit, because that's what's magnetic. That's what people are drawn to, because it is so different than anything they've seen anywhere else. And the people who love it are going to love it. And that's why Garrett's in love with me. That's why my friends love me. That's why every place I've been magnetic, it's just knowing what is so powerful about you and tuning into that and not being afraid. And I can guarantee you, everything you've ever been shamed for is a part of it. If you've ever been shamed for it, it's what makes you different and unique, and those have been the wrong containers. And I am so sorry you've had the wrong containers. I'm so sorry all of us have had them. But somewhere out there, there is somebody desperate for it, because I use the word sensitivities for a reason. We experience life through our senses. We see, taste, touch, smell, hear life. Sensitivity is the thing that makes us alive, right? Numbness is the opposite, right? That's
Yep.
objectification. That's going towards death. But sensitivity, the more alive we are, the more we feel and experience life, we come alive. Now, we want to feel alive and we want to make other people feel alive. I have this gorgeous painting behind me and I look at it every single day and I purposely record right here because I love it, because that's what art does. Art makes us sensitive to life. It makes us come alive. Good sex turns us on. It makes us sensitive to life. Good conversation turns us on. It makes us sensitive to life. Our role here is to activate and bring life. And God knows we need it right now, right? There's a lot of overwhelm and stress and problems in our world today. We need people to be coming alive and engaged in the life around them. And that's all we're doing, is we're tapping into what's our sensitivity? How do we make this world more sensitive? How do we make ourselves and the people around us come alive? And that right there is unbelievably magnetic.
Yes. It also takes a shit ton of courage.
It takes a shit ton of courage. You're absolutely right. But before we even get to the point of courage, because we need to get to the point of even knowing what that looks like. And so here's how I often talk about the way that we live life. Most of us, myself included for a long time, live life like we are shooting darts in the dark. So the lights are off and we are trying to hit that bullseye. We are trying so hard to hit that bullseye, but we can't see. We have no idea. And here's the thing. Once in a while, we actually do hit the bullseye. A miracle happens. We get a relationship we love. We get a
Yeah.
job we love. Something just works out. And even when that happens, we have no idea what we did or how to repeat it. So what I'm interested in, and why I talk about mapping sensitivity so much, is looking at all the times we've ever hit the bullseye in life and just flipping on the light switch. At
Yeah.
least we know what we did. Now, this is where it gets to the point of courage you just mentioned. I can't guarantee just because you know where that bullseye is that you're going to hit it every time. In fact, I'm not very good at darts, especially if I haven't had a drink of alcohol. So I am not going to hit that bullseye every time. But the difference is I know how. And this is where I can practice in unique ways. Whenever I get in a fight with my husband, doesn't happen often, knock on wood, but when I get in a fight with my husband, we have this really interesting practice. So let's say that I am fighting with Garrett about, let's say I'm saying something, a really personal story, and he's looking down at his phone, right? And I'm like, oh boy. So I'm going to start, yelling at him about this in the past. Now, what I've learned, it's very easy to do, is wait a minute. Everything I feel is related to one of my core sensitivities. So let me pause and say, am I feeling triggered by a line, zany, free, vulnerable? Okay, wait a minute. That's the one that I feel triggered by. And I will literally just say these words out loud. Hey, Garrett, I feel overly vulnerable right now because I revealed something that was really personal to me, and it feels like you're not paying attention or reciprocating. I feel shame around this issue, which is something I'm working on. And what I need for you is to validate me and also open up so that we can have this conversation. Now, what's really interesting about that, and because that's where it takes courage, but at least I know where to start the courage. What is interesting about that is I'm no longer fighting about the phone. It was never about the phone
Yeah.
in the first place. I'm fighting about the fact that I feel overexposed and vulnerable. And so I'm asking what's one action step I can take to own and take responsibility, and what's one action step I need for you to support that. And the cool thing about life is I actually know his sensitivities. Makes life way easier when we begin to fight.
Mhm. Yes. More clarity around yourself and clarity around your partner allows you to have clarity in your conversations and your
Mm,
relationships. Yeah. I was thinking that it takes a lot of courage to be more sensitive and to be more alive, because then you feel everything more.
yes.
Feeling more joy and more
Yes.
bliss and more vulnerable also means feeling more pain, more
Yes.
sorrow, more anger, um, everything that makes us uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And this is where trauma begins to come into it. This is where all of our stories and beliefs and anything we have to work through comes in. People a lot of times will say to me, oh, I know my sensitivity, so life gets easier. I'm like, no, no, no. This is where life actually gets harder.
Yeah.
It's going to be it's richer and more fulfilling,
Yep.
but this is where it's going to get harder because all the things that we've been trying to suppress and repress are going to be coming up now.
Totally.
And we now are taking more responsibility for our lives. And it's really, really hard. And so there is, trauma that we are not, responsible for. We didn't ask to come into our lives, but unfortunately, we're responsible for healing because that's the only way we're moving forward. And so, it becomes this. You're absolutely right that it's challenging. This is where the work comes in, and I think that for many of us, I think it can be easier sometimes to not know, because
Yeah.
then we don't have to necessarily go
Absolutely.
into that, right? I mean, I
Yes.
sometimes I think ignorance really is bliss, but it's not rich, it's not fulfilling. It's not real purpose or meaning. And I can tell you, so I had an experience the other day. This is really interesting. I was working with a client, and she mentioned to me that this man gave her the best sex of her life, and it was a very toxic relationship, and she feels like she will never have sex that good again. And I said, whoa, 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 let me slow down. So actually, talking to a woman here is easier for me than talking to a man, because here's the thing. I said to her, let's say that someone has given you the best sex, they're doing all the right things, and you get stressed about something, or your mind goes somewhere else. Are you going to have the best orgasm of your life? And she said, of course not. I said, exactly. It's not about him. It's you. You've unlocked something. Now, he might have pushed the right buttons and you had to help you unlock it, but you have the power. And I want you to understand that, because when you know that power within, and when you know how to unlock it, then any man who is, and she's heterosexual, any man who is willing to listen can give you the best sex of your life,
Yeah.
because you know how to ask for what you need and you know what's true for you. And I think this is really important, because we're talking about actual sexual empowerment here. We're talking about knowing ourselves and knowing our bodies. And
Yeah.
here's the kicker, the irony is, it's so funny because people know this, they have their sensitivities and they just forget. We all forget. And so I said, okay, did he make you feel glamorous? And she's like, oh yeah, he would take me to nice restaurants and he drove a Porsche. And I was like, okay. And was he creative? She's like, oh, we always met at hotel bars. And I was like, right. These are the things that turn you on. Hello. If you know
Yeah.
your turn ons, how can you give them to yourself? Maybe you wear sexy lingerie and you have a creative masturbation night for yourself. Maybe, like, what is it that you're going to do to realize you have the power? Because once you start realizing that, you are now, empowered about your sexuality, and you can ask for what you need. And it's never about the person. I mean, obviously we're going to have sexual compatibility with certain people, but it's because we're sensitive to certain things, right? It's about us. And when we talk about sex, we are going to talk about trauma. All of us, whether we've had specific traumas like assault, or whether we have just grown up in a repressed, misogynistic, homophobic, transphobic, whatever society, we are all having traumas around sexuality. And to begin to look at and unpack those things, we have to start looking at those. Unfortunately, this client in particular, and many women I work with, have been really conditioned to believe that sex is performance based and the man has all of the power. And if a man is good at performance, I mean, this is the most bullshit thing I've ever heard. And I need to say this right now. Sex has nothing to do with performance. Okay, I have one definition of good sex. And my definition of good sex is it feels good for all people involved. That is it. I don't care how long it lasts. I don't care the size of anything. I don't care what anybody does. If one person feels really good and the other doesn't, that's not good sex. That's not good sex at all. Good sex is about connection. And connection does not have to be monogamous. It does not have to be long-term. It can be a one-night stand. It can be the kinkiest thing in the world. It does not matter. But if you feel connected to yourself, your body, and the person in that moment, that's intimacy. And that's going to be much better sex. And if you know what you need and how to ask for it, that's going to be amazing sex. I do not care how long someone lasts or what their experience is or what their performance is. That has no indication on good sex. And we need to stop pornifying the way we view sex.
Yes. I love that. I feel like a theme in my podcast so far has been your sexuality is yours.
Yes.
It's not your partner. Like, we put so much
Mm-hmm.
emphasis on, well, this one person, like your client, oh, this one person made me feel this way. And so if I don't have them, I'll never feel this way again.
Yep.
Or I don't know, we connect our sexuality to the people that we have sex with, which
Yeah.
like it is connected, but first and foremost, your sexuality is your own.
Absolutely.
It's you. And so if you know you and you know your body and you become an expert in your own sexuality, then you're right. Like, it makes it so much easier for you to have amazing sexual experiences with other
Yes.
people
And with yourself, right?
and
Like
with
with
yourself.
anything involved. Yes. And I think, this goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this conversation, which is you asked me, who am I? And I think that most of the time we define ourselves through relationship or through context. We don't always define ourselves through this
Yes.
is me, right? And so it's like,
Yes.
when we're talking about sex as well, is we're defining good sex through the partner that we have. And so much of
Exactly.
this is the way that we're conditioned in society, that we gain worth through what we have or do, right? It's never who we are. It's like go to any party. What's the first question someone asks you? What do you do, right? They are sizing you up. They want to know how valuable you are as a person. And this is a really toxic, problematic way that our world views itself. And so, of course, everything then becomes split into, I call it the shame praise dichotomy. Everything is split into shame and praise. So if I ever say, having, like, let's say being heterosexual is praiseworthy, society says that, therefore the opposite is going to be shameful, right? And the degree to which we award value to the praise is going to be the degree to which the same magnitude is going to be shameful. And so we see it moving in those directions. We can talk about fat phobia this way, transphobia, racism. We can talk about anything related to this. And what starts to happen then is we learn to lean on the praiseworthy things, or the things that give us worth, and hide or run away from the shameful things. So we're now like half of ourselves or less, right? We're downplaying so much of who we are. And therefore, we're going to define ourselves according to our relationship to those praiseworthy things. Like, so often, in our minds, even, we might equate good sex to somebody who looks a certain way, or can do certain things, or has a certain size of whatever. And it's so preposterous when we break it down and think about it, but we can understand where it comes from, because since we're born, that's how we define worth for ourselves.
Yes. Tell me a little bit more about shame.
Oh gosh, there's so much to talk about here with shame. I think that shame, there's a lot of theories and talk about shame. So a few things I have to say about it. One is shame is considered the emotion most closely related to death. And that's
Yep.
because when we feel shame, we are essentially saying, I wish this part of me, whether it's part of my experience or part of who I am, were dead. We're not here, right? When I feel ashamed about something, I wish I could either cut out that memory or I could cut out this part of me. So we are in some way literally wishing for death. Now, here's the interesting thing about the human body. The shame is exciting. Shame actually releases dopamine. Shame releases dopamine in many cases at the same level that praise does. We're talking about shame praise dichotomy. We're talking about that. The body is hardwired to work through shame. And it's really beautiful. Now, one thing I am a huge fan of, because we all have shame around sexuality, and I am very, very, so my number one rule is safety first. We never, ever, ever want to go into anything that's re-traumatizing. And we want to work with appropriate professionals, whether that's a therapist, somatic body healer, whoever we're working with.
Yep.
However, we can eroticize shame. And this is one of, I think, the most powerful ways to use sexuality to work through shame. And that is, let's say that I have shame around some internalized homophobia, right? And in myself. And I am going into sex, and you can do this by yourself, but I'm going to use an example of with a partner. And I say to Garrett beforehand, I'm, feeling really vulnerable today, and I'm working through some internalized homophobia. So already I'm going to set some boundaries or set a container that feels safe to me. Then I go into that environment, and maybe I choose the position that I have the most shame around, or something that feels really shameful. And I may, in that position, be speaking out loud fantasies of imagining if X person walked in and saw me in this, or whatever was happening here. Oh my gosh, and I may even use language that feels like very shameful. I may begin to turn myself on through the shame to the point of orgasm. Now, the reason that I'm doing that is, we know during an orgasm, first of all, your brain is lighting the F up, right? So there's a lot of things going on. Things can be rewired really quickly in that moment. Number two here is I'm working through it, and I'm taking something that is the closest to death, and I'm now equating it or using it with the closest to life, right? An orgasm is literally how we create life, right? And so what I'm doing here is I'm essentially saying, like, hey, this part of me that is so wrong or bad, or I feel bad about, is turning me on, is making me alive, is making me more sensitive, right? That is beautiful and sexy. And we can do this anyway. Like, I worked with a client recently who, it's a heterosexual cisgender female. She was like, well, okay. And she's had a significant amount of sexual trauma. This was not something we were going into right now. We want to work with this in very, very safe ways to start. And she doesn't feel sexy. And I said, okay, with your husband, here's a way that you can play with it. You can start having sex with your husband and say, I'm not even sexy. Why are you turned on by me? Why? Like, I'm not sexy at all. Like, why would you even want to have sex with me? You only like girls who are like sexy and dirty and covered in mud and gay. Could you imagine me covered in mud and dirty and sexy? And I'm not the girl. and getting herself so excited to the point of orgasm. Because what's happening is she's looking at this dichotomy in her mind, that there are these good girls who aren't sexy, but blah, blah, blah. And there are these dirty, slutty, muddy, whatever girls who are, all super sexy. And being able to say, wait a minute, that is like a bullshit dichotomy that I've created in my mind that's keeping me in this place. And so when we can, and this is maybe in advance, not everybody, if we have significant trauma, I don't recommend going into this right away, but when anybody can eroticize shame and allow that to be a life-giving, a sensitivity-giving thing, it is incredibly powerful. It can really help us work through it. And my rules around it always create immense safety. Speak out loud if you can. There's a big difference between when we actually verbalize versus just thinking something. And that includes masturbation. So we can speak those words out loud if we're solo, as long as, we feel that we have the privacy we need. And imagining using fantasy, whether it is imagining someone else in this situation that can help us eroticize, like, that client imagining these girls being in the mud and really being very primal, or whether we're imagining a situation involving ourselves, like somebody walking in and seeing us, or, reimagining the past. We might go back to the past and reimagine a moment. And the kicker here, and this is the really important part, is stay in our bodies and feel our bodies. Now, we don't want to get to the point of trauma where we disassociate from our bodies. So that's why we always start really safe. But we want to make sure we feel our bodies, because we want to be absolutely connected to our bodies to the point of orgasm. What we're doing then is equating fantasy or something in our mind into a felt experience. And that becomes, and then the last point I always say is we need a debrief. So this could be journaling about what we felt and experienced. If we're working with a partner, this could be talking to the partner about what that experience was like for us, what happened. My rule, because I am the vulnerable guy, is never, ever, ever do I shame anything in the moment. Now, if I'm uncomfortable with something Garrett says, I might take note of that. I mean, and if it really is, so uncomfortable, I shut down. I might say I need to stop right now. But I will never say, this is wrong of you. It may have just needed to be said. I need to stop, take my own time, and then we can re-engage at a different point. But the reason for that is because sometimes, especially when we near orgasm, things need to be said just to be said. And they're not even true necessarily, right? Yeah. And sometimes fantasies, it's really about the shame of saying it out loud more than the shame of it actually being true. And that's okay. That's great. I have said weird shit. Everybody has said weird shit. Everybody's thought weird shit. Let that come through. The shame of that is the thing that's holding you back.
So I love that you're talking about moving directly into shame.
Yeah.
In a pleasurable way, while staying connected to your body and yourself and your experience consciously.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people, the things that they're ashamed of sexually, which usually translates to other things in life as well, as we know.
Yeah.
Like we do that with fantasy or porn sometimes, like people don't want to show you their porn, right? They don't want to tell you about their darkest, most hidden fantasy because it brings them the most shame.
Yep.
And so you're saying do that, but in real life, like bring that out and say it out loud and communicate it with a partner if you can, or just even admitting it to yourself and bringing it into your lived experience. What do you say to people who are afraid that would be dangerous?
So, again, safety, here's the thing about boundaries. We talk about boundaries a lot of times like they're for defensiveness or protection. And that certainly boundaries can be used that way, but we need to take it a step further. Boundaries are always for safe expression. The safer we feel, the more we express ourselves. The only reason we want to feel protected and defensive is so we can express. If you put yourself in the safest place you can imagine, like with a best friend doing an activity you love, you can express yourself naturally. It just happens naturally. So the safer we feel, the more we express ourselves. And boundaries just create safety. So the first thing I always say is if it feels dangerous, quote unquote, in any way, if it's re-traumatizing, we do not want that. We don't want to go into trauma, and we want to be really, really gentle with that. Now, if we are afraid of how a partner will react, which is a legitimate fear that we may have, what I always do is, like you saw in my example, set boundaries proactively. I don't
Yep.
need to be defensive. I want to be proactive. I want to say, Garrett, I'm working through something right now. I'm going to be really vulnerable and I don't know what's going to come forward. And I just want to make sure that we hold space for that. We can have a conversation after the fact if we need to. And so what I'm doing is trying to create. Now, it does take courage and it can build up and you can have multiple conversations with your partner about this over time. So it's not like a one and done. Like this can be slowly, like you reveal a little bit of something and a little bit of something. And that's how, vulnerability and disclosure happens. We do it through trust as we build trust over time. But I love that you brought up this idea of porn because I think that for many of us, we are really interested in fantasy and voyeurism because there are things that want to be expressed, but we don't take it all the way. And it's actually safer and easier to not feel our bodies in those moments, to just keep
Yep.
it mental, right? So we're not actually connected to our own bodies. We're not vocalizing it out loud. And then what happens to a lot of people when it comes to porn is they will find their way into fantasies. They'll be super excited about it. And after orgasm, they feel shame.
Totally.
And that's a very, very common thing that's going to happen. So what they did was they didn't really work with the shame. They kind of pushed the shame aside, avoided it, and then felt the shame afterwards. And that's not what we're talking about. And I know it's
Yep.
a little bit nuanced here, like it sounds similar, but we're actually talking about something very
It's very
different.
different.
They
Yeah.
were very, very different. So what we are talking about here is the reason I'm saying the words out loud of the shame is because I want to be connected in the present moment. I want to feel in the moment. Like you can even while masturbating, while watching porn say, oh my God, I can't believe I'm attracted to this. This is so effed up and I can't believe that this turns me on, but it turns like just saying those words out loud is connecting you in your body to what's actually happening there.
Yes.
And it's okay to work with that shame and be eroticized by it. Like we all, what I will say about fantasies is 99% of fantasies are metaphorical, which means that they are not nearly as literal as we think that they are. A
Yep.
lot of times, like for example, if I'm playing with power dynamics, do I want in my everyday life to have a power differential with my husband? No, I don't. But do I feel safe enough to explore my relationship to power in the bedroom? Absolutely.
Yep.
And so any places where I may feel that I'm dominating someone else or I'm submissive to somebody else, I can work through in that particular pattern. Doesn't mean that it's my desire and I want that all day, every day. That means it's something I'm working through. And so when we're even thinking about fantasy in the first place, we can feel safe knowing that this is not something that we are, necessarily wanting to even act out in real life or in the most literal way. And if it does feel problematic or it scares us, we can always get the support of a therapist. We can always talk about this and unpack this a little bit more. So that's always a resource I want to make available. But, the bottom line here is that when we are connected to our bodies, and I want to say that because there's a relationship here between shame and disassociation and trauma.
Yep.
And so people think of disassociation as something that is very, very, very pathological. And, we disassociate all day long, literally all day. Later today, I might go downstairs to do some laundry and I might be thinking about this conversation and then realize I'm downstairs and be like, oh, how did that happen?
Yep.
My mind and consciousness was one place, my body was in another. We do this all the time. Now, that's a beautiful defense mechanism against, experiencing trauma in the moment. So we know that in moments of, sexual assault, we might disassociate. It's a beautiful a coping mechanism our body has.
Yes, an amazing one.
Amazing one. We want to honor that. We don't want to just,
Yeah.
pathologize. Or I can say
Pathologize.
pathologize it. Thank you. I
Yep.
couldn't say that for a second. Pathologize it. We want to also, vindicate it and understand that this is a beautiful skill set that we
Yeah.
have. But when we are working with shame specifically, that's kind of what we're doing when we're fantasizing or watching porn. We are disassociating from the shame and then it's coming back in later. And that's not giving us the power to work with it and bringing life to it. What we want to do is stay connected to our body and feel our body. And for some people who have had a lot of disassociation in their life and haven't been able to stay in their body, a lot of times I recommend just like before you even get into a sexual situation, just feel your feet. Notice if they feel hot or cold. Notice if they feel heavy or light. Like just notice, just bring some consciousness to that area. And then try to pay attention to them while you are engaging in sex. And the second you notice that you're not feeling your feet anymore or you're going straight into your mind, you are going to pay attention. What was said? What happened? What was triggered there? This is going to help us understand where our trauma or our triggers are that are making it unsafe to be in our bodies.
Yep.
Obviously, if we've had significant sexual trauma, this may be more or less safe or difficult, and we may want support around this issue.
Yep. You're speaking my language. Love it. So can you speak a little bit more about Like, I know, for example, a lot of guys have, um, and girls
Mhm,
have a dominant side,
mhm,
but especially in our society, we're now taught that's a bad thing. You can't
yeah,
be that way. You're supposed to be meek and gentle all the time. And
yep,
I don't know.
yeah, yeah,
So if somebody connects to that part of them and brings it out in the
yeah,
bedroom, or I guess we're just speaking about sexuality right now, so I'll leave
yeah,
it at in the bedroom. Then they're afraid it's going to take over. They're going to become the super aggressive dude
mhm,
that
mhm,
dominates everybody all the time and is a total jackass.
mhm, mhm,
Or from my own personal experience, I was really repressed growing up. Lust was like a terrible, terrible,
mhm,
terrible thing. So I have like this inner hedonist
yeah,
that when I found her, it was terrifying to even
yeah,
touch into her like 10% because I was afraid if I give her an inch, she's gonna fucking take over my life.
yep,
And I'm just gonna like go have sex with a million people and that's all I'm gonna do in my life. And she's gonna blow up everything for me.
yeah.
So how um like what do you think about, or how do you teach people how to engage in that, um and not be afraid that it's going to take over their life, or
Mhm,
to stop it from taking over their life, or to control
mhm.
it, or how do you deal with that?
Yeah, this is such a beautiful question. Thank you for asking this. I think that those shadow forms, as I call them, or the parts of themselves that we've kind of kept in ourselves that we've kept into the shadows, they're really scary, and it feels like this like
Yes.
chained up beast that when we unleash
Yes.
that beast, is just going to take over, and we're going to lose ourselves.
Yeah.
And here's the thing about sex: we actually do lose ourselves, right? During an orgasm, I mean, we are just flailing and whatever. Like we have completely lost control. We actually the whole point of sexuality, and if you believe sexuality is incredibly spiritual, which I do, is really this losing of the self for a moment and connecting to the oneness, God, spirituality, universe, whatever language feels comfortable for you. And so there's something deeply, 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 immensely powerful about sex. Wow, I did not think I was going to say this, but I'm going to say this today. Okay, so this is a little off topic, but it's not, and I want to go here for a moment.
Go.
I've had moments of the most spiritual moments I've ever had are during sex.
Yes,
And
right.
specifically, there was a few times I've had this experience, but when I chose to, sometimes when we are sexual, we will play with power dynamics, and sometimes Garrett likes to be really dominant, and that invites in my submission, or when I'm dominant, it invites in his submission. In this particular situation, he was feeling very, very dominant, and I was performing fellatio, and I was feeling, on my knees and feeling like, really, really vulnerable and aligned and zany, and feeling those sensitivities so strongly that I began to feel like I was giving Garrett all of my power. Like every ounce of power I had, I was giving to him and worshiping a literal God. And that this was a God, and I was in a complete state of worship. And through that, we talked about it after, he began to feel really godlike. And that got to a point where I felt like I wasn't just worshiping his penis or him, I was worshiping every man and every human being. And it was just this complete worship of the human form. And I was giving every ounce of my power. But here's the kicker: I wasn't giving my power because I felt weaker. I was giving my power to a God in my mind because I felt more powerful, because I felt so connected to my power that this was an endless source. And I could give literally every ounce I have. I could worship on my knees in the most submissive form that I've ever been in and still have an endless supply of power. And I share that story with you because I lost myself, right? Like I went there and I was totally lost in the experience and in the moment. But to get to that point, a few things were required of me. One is that I had to have extreme safety. And we
Yep.
know safety comes from boundaries. And so, we want to, not boundaries of fear, boundaries out of love. And so creating this that I feel incredibly safe, that I feel like I can give up all of my power and this person will never abuse that power.
Yes.
And this is what I really want to be clear about. There's a strong difference between dominance or even aggression and abuse. And I
Yep.
want everyone to understand this, because this is not something that we are taught in our society. We aren't taught how to have boundaries around this. When we are playing with dominance in the bedroom or even outside, but especially in the bedroom, we are only temporarily giving our power up to somebody so that they can help support us having even more power. It's a game we are playing to explore power and to have more of our own power. This is not somebody who is, this is happening with consent. It's not somebody who is taking or abusing our power. It's not somebody who is manipulating us in any way, shape, or form. And so we have to have strong boundaries and strong around this. Now, I'm not saying it can't be a one-night stand. We can create strong
Oh,
boundaries
yeah.
if that feels really good and for us. But we have to feel incredibly safe. And I find for myself, because this is years into my relationship with Garrett, it took me time. So for me, it has taken time to feel really safe with this one particular person. But I'm not everybody. I don't want to, say that you have to be in a monogamous relationship or a long-term relationship to experience that. But so one, if we want to create extreme boundaries that feel so good and so nourishing so that we can go deeper. And two, it's about being fully connected to ourselves and our bodies. Now, in that moment, I felt all of my sensitivities. I felt so vulnerable and so successful and so unmistakably me that it allowed me to give of all of myself because I wasn't actually losing anything. I was, in fact, being generous. And it sounds crazy, but making someone else feel like a god because I felt so powerful. And that, I want to say, is that we have that ability within us. The reason we're so afraid is because we feel that godlike nature within us. We feel that if we unleashed it, it is going to be power beyond all measure. And we're scared that we can't handle that level of power. But what I can tell you with certainty is that you need to be in your body, feeling your body, experiencing it. That's how you're not losing yourself. You're charging yourself. And you're feeling yourself charge up and up and up in extreme safety. And so my, advice to everybody, because for many of us, I work with a lot of, cisgender gay men. I work with a lot of, cis straight women who have been sexually repressed for a lot of their lives, right? Our societies. So there's this kind of reservoir. There's this about to break the dam. It is just ready to come out of us. And I understand this dynamic. And so there can be this real fear. And what starts to happen when I see somebody who, at first that can flow. But when it doesn't stop flowing, what I find is these people aren't actually connected to themselves yet. So, and they aren't understanding what boundaries look like or what safe, good boundaries look like. So what starts to happen is we are still hungry. We're hungry for the thing we want. The only reason we ever have sex is for an essence. It's for a sensitivity. It's to feel something. It's not just to have an orgasm. That's great. When I have sex, I want to feel vulnerable. I want to feel successful. I want to feel zany and playful. That's good sex to me. And when I understand that, I know how to ask for what I need. So I'm not just, having sex with any random person because I'm always going to be hungry. I'm going to need tons of sex to be satiated. But if I know exactly what I need, I know how my body works, I feel connected to my body, I can create safe boundaries, which is another way of saying asking for exactly what I need to feel safe, then I'm going to feel my true power. And what happens is, here's the thing about boundaries, and we can just think about this. If I've got something with solid boundaries and I pour water into it, the water stays within it. If I've got something with porous boundaries and I pour water into it, the water begins to spill out. I want to feel that godlike nature. I want spiritual sex. I want to feel all of it within me. I don't want it spilling out all over the place. I want all of that for me. And so what good boundaries do is it's not just about protection and defensiveness. Like I said, it's about feeling our true nature. It's about feeling all of it and realizing that, beast that wants to be unleashed, she or he or they are charging us up. They're not going out somewhere else. We're not losing ourselves. We're gaining ourselves. And that's the difference.
Absolutely. Can you give me an example of some strong and safe boundaries?
Yes, absolutely. So, two things I talk about with boundaries. One is clarity around our relationship to the space. So I'm going to give you the opposite of that. The opposite, when I don't have clarity around relationship to a space, means that I don't know how to take up the space fully or ask to take up the space. I don't know, where my space is that I don't want invaded, and I don't know how to not invade other person's space. So I have confusion about it. And I'm going to actually give you a very specific example because I think this is going to be helpful. Yesterday, this just happened yesterday, I had someone reach out to me on Instagram and said, when are you going to do a photo shoot in white underwear? That's my fantasy. And when are we going to see nude photos of you? And in the past, I would have thought I'm blocking this person. This is like inappropriate. And I thought, well, wait a minute. This person could be theoretically following any number of, porn stars or sex workers or people who are more explicitly, talking about nudity. I'm not. So they're interested in something. They may not have the language or the boundaries to understand. So they're confused about their relationship to the space. Now I'm going to explore this. And I said, you will never see nude photos of me. I only post what I choose to post. Nobody's desires or, fantasies will ever change what I choose to post. I'm here to help you explore your own sexuality, your own fantasies. And I'm glad you enjoy, my words, my photos, and I hope that they help you go deeper and reflect even deeper. If that ever feels out of alignment, you're always welcome to unfollow me, but I'm really glad you're here. Keep kicking ass. And what this person said back was, thank you so much. That was so helpful and clarifying. I really appreciate you taking the time, and keep kicking ass too. And of course, I never expect to hear anything inappropriate from this person again. And if it is, I'm happy to block this person. But what I began to understand is this person had confusion about their relationship to the space. They did not understand it. And so what I did is I reset what is this space. I just helped to clarify that. So that's number one. One thing is we have confusion on relationship to the space, whether it's we're turning a friendship to a sexual relationship. That's not appropriate. We have confusion about that. That's one way that boundaries can be unclear. And so we want to make sure that we have total clarity of is everyone's intention clear here? And am I taking up the space? Am I honoring my part of it and honoring your part? The second is, we have unclear communication, which always comes from unclear thinking. Now, our thinking may be unclear because of a lot of things. We might have beliefs that make it unclear. We might have trauma that makes us see situations unclearly. We may also have competing desires. So I may desire, let's say to be super vulnerable here, but also desire to feel really free. And they may feel at odds in this particular moment. I feel like I can't rectify them or reconcile them.
Yep.
And so when I have competing desires, I may not be able to think clearly about what I want here. So I may not be able to communicate clearly. And so when I talk about, really, really good boundaries, strong boundaries, what I'm talking about here is being really clear on what I'm trying to get out of this, what my thinking is, so that I can communicate that very, very clearly, what I need, what I want. And then also, what's my relationship to the space? Even if I want, this with Garrett to have the most spiritual, submissive sex, like that story again. A, am I, really clarifying and speaking my needs clearly? And then B, if I am, is he even in the right headspace for that? Is he able to kind of take up the space? I know my relationship to it, but I do understand his. And so when I'm engaging in sex, and I know this sounds complicated and heavy, but the more that we do this work, the less it can feel complicated, because really all it's doing is saying, hey, Garrett, and I'm going to use the exact phrase I've used again, is I'm working through internalized homophobia today. I really feel called to be really vulnerable and work through this. I might say some things, so I just want to know if we hold space for that. What I'm doing there is I'm clearly understanding my needs, speaking them very, very clearly, proactively. I'm checking in on the space, talking about how I'm going to fill up and take up the space in this situation, and asking if he can hold his part of the space. Now, if at any point that's not the case, that's okay, and that doesn't need to be. But if I'm not doing that, I have not created that safe space for good sex. And so when I'm trying to do something, that's where we get into the word you used before, which is dangerous. That's where sex can feel dangerous, because now I have insecurity around, oh my God, I want to say this, but Garrett might not be able to hold space for it, and he might not be in the mood today. And it starts to get really wonky, and I don't want that.
Amazing. A lot of boundaries is being very clear on who you are and what you want,
Mm-hmm.
and speaking it out loud, being safe enough to
Absolutely.
speak it out loud and take up space.
Absolutely.
Safe is sexy. It's one of my mottos.
Yes, that is the statement of the day. Safe is sexy. We want better sex. We want better safety. And if we want more safety, we need more clarity. Clarity is always going to create safety.
Yeah. And even being safe with yourself. Being a
Mm-hmm.
safe place for yourself means speaking up for what you want, saying yes when you mean yes, saying no when you mean no, knowing that you have your own back, that you're on your own side, that you'll stand up for yourself in whatever way you need to. That creates feeling of safety wherever you are. Then there's the additional feeling of safety with somebody else,
Yes.
like you were talking about, and you can create that other than the person just being kind of a safe person, but you can create that by stating what the space is, like you were saying,
Yes.
and also knowing that they'll respect you and that they also know what they're coming into.
Absolutely. And if I can, I'd love to add to the being safe with yourself, being safe with your body, because I think
Yes.
that a lot of people do not feel safe. A lot of us don't feel safe in our own bodies. And so having it, and this does not have to be related to a sexual context, but just spending time with our bodies. For a lot of people, I was just working with somebody who has, it's a gay cisgender man who has a significant sexual trauma. And, said that he feels a lot of shame around sexuality. And so I asked, and I sort of knew the answer, but I asked this intentionally. Is this true of all sex acts equally, or are there certain sex acts that feel more or less safe? And of course, the answer was the more penetrative, the less safe it feels. I said, okay, we know this. I wanted to say that because I want you to explore that there's multiple things going on here. And so, can you take a non penetrative sex act? Can you begin to, he is very comfortable with pornography. Can you begin to work with that pornography and maybe not even go to a point of orgasm, but allow your partner to just be there having a conversation with you, or touching you softly and letting you know that you're safe in your body. You can say no at any point. You can stop him, like feel the least penetrative possible. And then when you feel ready, maybe move to, let's say, fellatio, where it's not anal penetration. It's not going to be that level, but a penetration that and very intentionally stop every once in a while and say, I'm choosing to stop. And remind
Yes.
your body, I can stop when I want to. And here's when it comes to being penetrated in any way, this is my big rule. And I really want to be clear about this. I think this is a very, very helpful analogy for all of us. If we are being penetrated in any way, and that's the mouth, anus, or vagina, then I equate it to eating at a restaurant. So if I go to a restaurant and I order food and I take a bite of that food and it's not what I want, I am not required to keep eating it. If I feel full in any way, I can put it aside. If it is cold and I don't like the way, it tastes, I can ask for it to be heated up. I get to do whatever goes into my body, I am in full control over. And at any point, it does not matter if I've taken one bite already, I am not required to finish that meal. I am not required to do anything. And if I ask for what I need and that person does not respond, now we're in a very different situation. And I want us to understand what that situation means, because we are in full control over what enters into our body at every point. And that's not like a one-time decision and we're stuck in it. That's a million-time decisions. We are doing it every second of the time. And I say that because I want us to remember, for many of us, especially if we have experienced assault or trauma in our lives, it can feel like we don't have 100% ownership or control of our own bodies. And I
Totally.
want us to feel, I use that phrase, which can be triggering to some people. I always say claim or own embodiment. And some people say, you don't own your embodiment, you be your embodiment. It's like, I understand what you're saying, but for many people out there, and I would even argue mostly all of us, owning it and feeling ownership of our body is very important. That's
Oh
actually
yeah.
a significant
Yeah.
phrase to use,
Yeah.
particularly survivors of assault. And so I want us to remember, and I said this is important, that if we ever don't feel that we're in control and we are performing a penetrative act, stop every once in a while. Just stop intentionally, ask to be taken out, remind your body, because it's one thing for our mind to know it, it's different for our body to know it. Remind your body that you are in control here, that you get to choose what goes in and what doesn't. You control if it's going too fast, you control anything about it. That can start to create some real, real safety.
Yes. How do you feel about people taking a sex session or a certain amount of time, like a partner, like you with your partner,
Mhm.
and saying, okay, in this time, in this sex session, I really want to explore power dynamics, but also being able to say no, and you um, seeing that you're not out of control or something. So
Mhm.
saying, I'm going to say no a couple times in this session just to say no,
Yeah. I,
etc.
before I even answer that, I'll go back to my definitions of really, really good boundaries, which is clarity around the relationship to the space and clear communication. And that checks both of those boxes beautifully. So yes, I mean, obviously, I'm a huge fan of that. What you're doing is you're very, very clear up front about what your intentions are, how the space is, what your rules are for the space, how you want that person to interact. And boundaries are negotiations. That person may say, well, here's what I need. And that's beautiful too. We
Yeah.
really want to have those conversations. That is so beautiful. And being proactive. Be as proactive as possible with boundaries. We never want to be reactive with our boundaries. So proactive is going to create even more safety for us. I think that's so beautiful because it allows us to explore things. And, over time, we can kind of create a shorthand for that. So that may feel very clinical for some of us early on, but over time, we know that if I'm starting to bring out this fantasy, we know where that's leading or what I'm asking for. And that's beautiful. And especially if we have a long term partner, that can help us begin to explore these things in ways that feel less awkward. I think dirty talk is one of those areas that people feel very uncomfortable with. And, really, dirty talk, I am a huge fan of dirty talk, by the way. I think that dirty talk is really playing with our own desires and our own clear communication.
Mhm.
And so we are just playing and having fun and taking it less seriously. And we can even say that, I always tell people, like, just tell your partner ahead of time, like, I'm going to play with some things. I'm going to say some shit, and who knows if it's going to sound good or not, but I'm playing. Because that confidence, that just being yourself, of just, speaking things out loud, using shame. And that's a great place. You want to start with dirty talk, start with where you're ashamed. And that vocalizing that shame, like we talked about before, that is dirty talk right there. So, like, oh my, to use the client example where she's like, oh my, I'm not even sexy. Why do you find me sexy? Like, I'm not this dirty. Like, that's already getting into dirty talk. So it's going to start with shame, and that will help you move into communicating your needs.
Start with shame. That's not a phrase you hear very often.
Hmm.
I love it. Okay, I could talk to you for like 5 more hours, but I want to be cognizant of time for you. So
Hmm.
I have three, I'll leave it at three. I have three questions to finish
Okay,
with today.
shoot, please.
What's the one biggest thing you wish men knew about sexuality?
Oh gosh, to boil it down to that. I think that you never have to try to be yourself. If you're trying, it means you're being somebody else. And I know that sounds sort of trite in some ways, but when we think about it, like when you are having coffee with a best friend and hours are flying by and genius is spilling out of you, it is just easy. And you don't try and you don't do anything. It's not performance based. You don't have to read a manual to know how to have a conversation with a friend. You are just being yourself. And who you are is enough. And who you are is right. And I think a lot of the toxic masculinity we have around sexuality is related to men needing to assert their masculinity, to feel masculine enough. And here's the thing: you never have to assert what's been fully claimed, right? You never have to defend something that's been fully claimed. But here's the kicker: you can't claim what isn't authentically you. It will never truly be you, right? So you will always be trying to assert and defend that. And we have a culture today through pornography, through rape culture, through this patriarchal language, where a lot of men, of course, we can talk about gay men as well, but specifically if we're talking about cisgender straight men, feel that they have to be somebody, or they have to do something, or they have to perform in a certain way, or they have to be what. And we talked about dominance. You can be a super submissive man, and that is sexy as hell. And there are a lot of women who are really turned on by that. So who you are, you never have to try to be yourself. If you're trying, it means you're being somebody else. And I want us all to know our sensitivities, feel super sexy and turned on as we are, and just show up. Sex isn't about performance, it's about connection.
Yes, absolutely. And what's the one biggest thing you wish women knew about sexuality?
Okay, well, it's pretty much the exact same answer.
Yes, I was
However,
wondering.
yeah, I mean, I think that women have different pressures maybe around, sexuality. And so I think for a lot of women, I'd also love women to really understand that you are in control of your sexual experience. You are sexually empowered. And especially for women, we know, a man can think about something they're stressed out about and still orgasm. A woman, their bodies work a little bit differently. And so to understand that you are the one unlocking your own door, right? Like you are the one to really, really get that. I don't care what a man does. If you're not in the right state of mind, you're not going to have the best orgasm of your life. And when you understand that you are sexually empowered, knowing your own body, knowing your own desires and turn-ons, not being afraid of those things allows you to always have the best sex of your life, because you can then ask for what you need. And, I know a lot of women, unfortunately, don't feel comfortable or confident asking for what they need because our society has been set up in such a way that I can't tell you how many women I work with who will say to me, "Oh my God, Mike, there are so many things I can only talk to you about, and I can't even talk to my female friends about." And that really upsets me because
Yep.
that should not be the case.
Yep.
You know, like, I'm so grateful they feel safe talking to me about certain issues, but this is something that we need to normalize. Women should be able to talk about their desires and talk about their needs, especially amongst other women and especially with the sex that they're having in life. And so being able to advocate for yourself is hugely important. We live in a world today that is pretty misogynistic and that does not really care about the female orgasm, quite frankly. And that puts an unfair pressure or unfair onus on women to be advocates for themselves. But to have a world where we need better sex, we need women advocating for one another and advocating for themselves during sexuality.
Absolutely. And this might be kind of the same, but what do you wish that you had known as a teenager about
Yeah.
sex or sexuality?
I think the biggest thing for me is just knowing that it's fluid and it changes. And it's not a one time thing. Just like I am not defined by the one job I've had or the one relationship or the one thing. I am a fluid human being who is exploring what vulnerable and zany and free and successful mean in every moment. And what that meant to me 10 years ago is very different than today. And it's going to be very different in another 10 years. And so that we want that. That's evolution. That's growth. That's what we want as human beings. We're not boxed in somewhere. And so allowing myself to just be present with myself in the moment and not afraid when I surprise myself because that's the excitement of life.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you. Where can people find you?
So you can just find me on my website, MikeIamele.com. If anybody is like burning desire to map their own sensitivities, we do have a free worksheet and training you can do at MikeIamele.com/map, MAP. That will give you a good taste of it. I am good. I'm not that good. So in 36 minutes, it's not your full process, but it's going to get you a little bit thinking. And of course, if
Yeah.
you ever want to work with me one-on-one, you can reach out. And I'm also on Instagram. We're having a lot of conversations around sex and sexuality. I'm only like 2 weeks into Instagram. I've been scared of social media, but I'm learning. So come find me over there and pull me out of my shell.
Nice. Amazing. I downloaded your freebie last night. I'm very excited to do
Woo!
it.
Love it.
Yes, I'll let you know how it goes.
Perfect.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you so much. It was an amazing interview. I loved it.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
All right.